Tonight at 10, a British man inspired by so-called Islamic State is starting a life sentence for the murder of an imam in Rochdale. Mohammed Saeedi plotted the killing of Jalaluddin. The imam's family say they've been left empty by his murder.
The fact that he was murdered by someone inspired by IS shows the true nature and barbarity of this organization and those who serve it.
Police say the imam was the victim of intolerance targeted because his Muslim practices were against IS beliefs. Also on tonight's programme. Angela Merkel says the EU is in a critical situation as leaders plan a way forward following Brexit. Making plans after Nigel, Diane James is elected the new leader of UKIP. Why are aid convoys not moving along the main road towards the Syrian city of Aleppo, despite a 4-day-old ceasefire? After 25 years, the mother of the missing toddler, Ben Needham, has been told to prepare for the worst. And the games that keep giving for Great Britain. At the Paralympics in Rio, they win their 50th gold.
In the south, thunder, lightning and torrential rain cause chaos in the south and bring an end to the summer heat. And M&S staff say the company's changing their contracts and they're losing money to pay for the living wage.
Good evening. It was a killing inspired by so-called Islamic State on the streets of Rochdale. Mohammed Saeedi, who's 21, was the getaway driver for a friend who bludgeoned an imam to death in February. And today, Saeedi was sentenced to life at Manchester Crown Court. Jalaluddin, who's 71, was attacked because he practiced a form of Islamic spiritual healing considered black magic by some extremists. The man who carried out the murder is thought to have fled to Syria. Here's Judith Moritz.
Jalaluddin came to Britain from Bangladesh in 2002. He lived here illegally, but it's said he made a positive contribution to the community in Rochdale.
He has shown no remorse or sympathy.
The imam sent money home to support his wife and children. They say his murder has left their family empty.
Although my father was a Muslim who peacefully practiced his faith, he had a love and respect for all religions, cultures and creeds. And the fact that he was murdered by someone inspired by IS shows the true nature and barbarity of this organization and those who serve it.
This video of Mr. Uddin in his white headscarf was filmed secretly. The pensioner's every movement tracked by those who wanted to get rid of him. It was found on the mobile phone of Mohammed Saeedi, a 21-year-old student and part-time Manchester United steward. Saeedi supported so-called Islamic State. His phone was full of pictures of him making the one-fingered IS salute and holding the group's flag. He worshipped at this mosque where Jalaluddin also prayed, but the pensioner performed spiritual healing using amulets containing these scrolls. IS punishes the practice by death. Saeedi and a friend, Mohammed Kadir, made him their target. Jalaluddin had eaten a meal with friends and was walking home through this children's park when he was ambushed. Kadir hit him repeatedly on the head with a hammer and then ran off to Saeedi's waiting car, leaving the pensioner bleeding on the floor, where he was discovered by 2 schoolgirls. Kadir has never been caught. He fled the country 3 days later. As the getaway driver, Saeedi has been convicted of murder under the law of joint enterprise.
He's a nice man.
Mohammed Abdul Rab was the last person to see his friend alive. They ate dinner together every night.
8:10, and gone is about 20 minutes eating and gone out.
Jalaluddin was murdered moments after leaving his house. His friend later had to identify his body.
We have 2 different amulets here, if you like.
The practice of spiritual healing is well known in Islam, but it's the first time it's been a basis for murder in Britain. However, it's not the first religiously motivated attack by one Muslim against another.
The murder in Rochdale is a reflection of what I believe has been happening in the UK and around the world, and that is that there is a civil war within Islam taking place right now. There are people who are being carrying out the blasphemy law and killing people who they deem not to be Muslim enough.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Taxi driver Alan Henning, who was killed by IS in 2014, knew Mohammed Saidi. They went on aid convoys with the same charity. But the jihadist views Saidi harboured resulted in murder on home soil. Mohammed Saidi shook his head as he was convicted. Tonight he begins a life sentence. He'll serve at least 24 years in prison. And the family of Jalaluddin came here to court from Bangladesh. They said to seek answers from Saidi. They say that he made their ordeal worse because he showed them no remorse or sympathy. And they also suffer from the knowledge that the man responsible for the attack, Mohammed Qadir, has so far escaped justice. He's believed to be in Syria. And counter-terrorism detectives tell me that tonight they do have hopes of tracing him eventually because an international arrest warrant is in place for his capture.
Judith, thank you for that. Judith Moritz there at Manchester Crown Court. Now, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the European Union is in a critical situation. She made the warning as EU leaders met in Slovakia to discuss the way forward following the Brexit vote, and Britain wasn't invited. She said the EU needed to restore public confidence in its policies on security, fighting terrorism and the economy. Our Europe editor Katja Adler reports from the summit.
Europe's leaders forging towards a new EU after the shock of Britain's Brexit vote. Well, that was the idea of today's meeting. But as leaders lunched on the Danube River today, the metaphors were all too tempting. The EU is in troubled waters. It's rather rudderless, and it's keen to steer itself back on a more stable, credible course. Germany's Angela Merkel was resolute today. We need solutions for Europe. We're in a critical situation, she said.
What Europe should not do is to continue sleepwalking in the wrong direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Everyone here wants the EU not just to survive, but to function a lot better. The problem is they're deeply disunited. Let's be honest, of course there were disagreements between EU countries before the Brexit vote, the euro and the migrant crisis. But it's the sum total of these events, this perfect storm, that now makes it much harder to paper over those cracks. So what are the main EU divisions? Central and Eastern Europe want powers back from Brussels, more national sovereignty. The North views the debt-laden South as a threat to the Eurozone, while Mediterranean countries fume about German austerity. But while the powerful German Chancellor used to coax or bully others into line, that's now harder. The migrant crisis damaged her credibility. This evening, as the summit drew to a close, Angela Merkel stood shoulder to shoulder with the French president. Today was largely about symbolism.
Der Geist von Bratislava war ein Geist, der...
But even as they spoke in gushing tones of the summit's constructive spirit, with new plans to defend EU borders, combat illegal migration and reduce youth unemployment, in a press room just next door, this.
I'm not satisfied with today's discussion about migration and economic growth, so there was no way I could do a joint press conference with the German Chancellor and the French President. I'm not going to simply read words from a script just to prove that we're united.
Consider this. EU leaders had thought employment and migration were subjects they could easily agree on here in Bratislava. They didn't even go near the really difficult topics like a future EU trade deal with the UK. Britain needs to start those negotiations first, of course, but a deal will need unanimity, with every EU leader on the same page. Right now, that's hard to imagine. And tonight, European Council President Donald Tusk raised a fair few British eyebrows when he said Theresa May told him last week that she'd probably start formal Brexit negotiations this January or February. Now, this has not been confirmed by Downing Street. Of course, up until now, the Prime Minister has remained purposefully vague about a start date. But Donald Tusk and many of his European partners are impatient, and he tried to use this opportunity to pile on the pressure on the UK. And if this, Clive, sounds a bit he said, she said, just wait until the real horse trading starts. OK, Katja, thank you for that. Katja Adler there in Bratislava.
UKIP's Deputy Chairman Diane James has been elected to replace Nigel Farage as leader. At their annual conference in Bournemouth, she claimed UKIP is now the opposition party in waiting, and they'd be keeping up the pressure on Theresa May for a 100% exit from the European Union. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar has more. His report does contain some flash photography.
He'll miss the spotlight, and his devoted followers are missing him already. It felt more like an emotional leaving do than a coronation for a new leader. His role in forcing the EU referendum is written into history. His parting gift, reminding the new management of its new mission.
The only time we will know that Brexit means Brexit is when that has been put in the bin and we get back a British passport.
So no backtracking on Europe, an end to EU regulations, what he called true independence.
We've won the war, we must now win the peace.
You're going to miss all this then?
Yeah, of course I will, but you know, it's time.
You can't give it up, surely.
I've got to. I've got to. It's the right time. I've given it over 20 years of my life. It's the right time. All right? Thank you.
The leader of the UK Independence Party, Diane James.
Diane James's time is now. She was backed by Mr Farage in a bitterly divisive contest. Her job is to reunite the party and set new goals, starting with this message to the Prime Minister.
If you're watching TV this afternoon, you'll be watching the opposition party in waiting. When you try to undermine us, demoralise us, demotivate us, just remember where the best ideas that you steal, where they came from, and in all likelihood where they will come from again in the future.
She promised to keep up the pressure to deliver on Brexit.
Stop the faff, stop the fudge, and the farce. Get on with it.
The new leader was the only one UKIP's biggest donor, millionaire businessman Aaron Banks, was prepared to back. The feuding in the party ran deep. UKIP members say they'll pull together.
At the grassroots level, we are not split, and that whatever problems there have been, if there have been any, then I'm certain that we will rise above them.
What could be better than having a lady running the show? We're not all just a bunch of beery, boozy people in UKIP.
Nigel Farage has that very special gift of being able to tell the truth in politics.
And what's Diane James got?
The same.
Members have been covering this giant leaving card for Nigel Farage with fond farewells. They'll miss his high profile and charisma as they try to answer the question, what's UKIP for now the vote to leave the EU has been won? But right-wing anti-establishment parties have found a place in politics across Europe, and there are protest votes up for grabs, especially with the main opposition parties at Westminster so weak and divided. He backed her, UKIP chose her, but now Diane James's life gets tougher. Filling the shoes of one of Britain's best-known leaders will be hard, satisfying her members' sharpened appetite for glory even harder. John Pienaar, BBC News, Bournemouth.
The mother of the toddler Ben Needham, who disappeared on the Greek island of Kos 25 years ago, says she's been told to prepare for the worst as police begin a fresh search for his remains. It's now thought Ben, who was 21 months old, may have accidentally been crushed by a digger on an island building site. James Reynolds reports from Kos.
Ben Needham was only 21 months old when he was last seen. For a generation, his family has searched for him. They've even released artists' impressions of him as an adult, convinced he may still be alive.
Well, the last time I saw Ben, he was playing just where the drum is there.
Early searches came up with nothing, but the police now have a new lead, which forces the family to reconsider Ben's fate. They have to re-examine what may have happened around the family farmhouse where he was last seen. One person on Kos has come forward with information about a friend, a digger driver who was working at a nearby building site when Ben went missing. The friend claims that the digger driver may have accidentally run over and killed the little boy.
If he'd have come forward 25 years before, or the man who did the accident, we probably could have forgiven him. We could have moved on and grieved, and Ben would have been laid to rest. We would have known where he is. And I don't think, of course I would have been angry, but we could have had a life.
The digger driver himself died last year. Locals in Kos have told the BBC they doubt he had anything to do with it. But to his mother, the new information feels final. Her son may be dead.
I think so. I think so. I don't think the police would have given us this information if it wasn't what they thought. This purpose in my life has always been looking for men. My reason for waking up in the morning and dealing with life. After that, then what?
In 2012, South Yorkshire police officers even came to Kos to search for his body. Ben was last seen here around his family's farmhouse. And his family has spent more than a quarter of a century hoping that he is still alive. But excavations on this island will soon begin, and his family will have to endure a search which may prove that Ben is dead. James Reynolds, BBC News, Kos.
4 days after a ceasefire began in Syria, a humanitarian aid convoy is still being blocked from entering the northern city of Aleppo. The US has called on Russia to persuade the Syrian government to allow access, but Moscow is blaming rebel fighters for the problem. Well, our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen is in Aleppo, from where he's been reporting all week. Jeremy, where does the truth lie in all this? Isn't aid getting in? Why isn't it getting in? And wasn't that the point of the ceasefire?
Was one of the points of the ceasefire, and both sides are blaming each other, as they always do. The UN, though, has said quite specifically that the problem is that there are some permissions the Syrians have to give, and then maybe things can go ahead. You know, the war is still going on here. As I was waiting to speak to you this evening, I've been hearing steady artillery fire. That doesn't necessarily mean the ceasefire is being broken, because not everybody's part of it. But it's a sign of what's going on here, the dangers and the difficulties. Now, part of the problem is the Castello Road. Now, that is the highway that they would take to come in from Turkey. And that has been a heavily contested area for some time, fighting between both sides of this very strategic highway. And now there are Russian soldiers up there who are manning various checkpoints. The Syrians say they've pulled back, the rebels say they've pulled back. Now, the thing about humanitarian access in this war, is that it's not just about need, it's about politics and it's about strategy as well, because the Syrians have deliberately besieged areas that they want to take control of, and they have stopped food getting in. It's been a successful tactic. It's worked in parts of Damascus, in Homs, different places. And they were trying to do all of this in East Aleppo as well, in rebel-held East Aleppo. I think what we can only conclude is that there are people there who don't want to dilute their siege of the area at all. And this is very important for the ceasefire because, as you said, the humanitarian aspects of this are one of the reasons why various rebel groups got involved, even though they thought the deal was letting the Assad regime off the hook. And I think that if they can't get the humanitarian side of this working, then it's another serious crack in an agreement which already, I think, seems to be deteriorating.
OK, Jeremy, many thanks for that. Jeremy Bowen there in Aleppo. Now, a British man with autism says he'll fight extradition to America to face charges of hacking the computer systems of several government agencies, including the US Army, NASA and the FBI. A judge ruled today that Laurie Love, who's 31 and has Asperger's syndrome, can be sent for trial. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford.
The prison chaplain's eccentric son, accused of being a sophisticated computer hacker. "I will remain," Laurie Love sang on his way into court, but he came out visibly shaken after the judge ruled that he could be sent to America for trial.
I really worry for the toll it's taking on my health and my family's because of the stress.
It is my belief that it is not fair or just
that a boy who's got mental health issues can be taken away from his family, who are his support network, merely to satisfy the desire of the Americans to exact what I feel is vengeance on him.
He's accused of hacking into the Federal Reserve, the FBI, NASA, and even the Missile Defense Agency, among many other US government computers, suspected of stealing hundreds of thousands of personnel records and thousands of credit card details. But his lawyers argued that with Asperger syndrome and depression, he would be a suicide risk in prison in America, far from his family. He told me he understood the allegations are serious, but he should stand trial here.
I don't know what my defence would be because I've not seen the evidence or the charges against me in the UK, but I know that, you know, if there is a debt to society, then it could be repaid and there could be rehabilitation and that we could continue to work constructively. I can't see that happening in America.
Although he's lost today, this isn't the end of the legal road for Lauri Love. He still has the right to go to the Court of Appeal to seek to have this decision overturned. His disappointed supporters then blocked one of the busiest streets in London. This case still has months or even years of argument left. Daniel Sanford, BBC News at Westminster Magistrates Court.
Now, until his political views began to raise eyebrows, Donald Trump's fame was the result of a hit TV show and voluminous hair. Well, the chat show host Jimmy Fallon has now done what some have dreamed of and ruffled the famous golden thatch of the Republican presidential nominee. Mr. Trump retained his composure and his comb-over. Now, there's been yet more success for Britain at the Paralympics with 7 gold medals so far on day 9 in Rio. Paralympics GB are now within touching distance of their London 2012 total of 120. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss has more.
And now Paralympic champion. It's a feat worth celebrating. Britain's 50th gold of the Games, and in Paul Blake, the happiest of history makers. Blake, who has cerebral palsy, won bronze and silver at London 2012, but here in the 400 metres, it was finally gold.
Paul Blake winning by 5 metres, 6 metres.
A landmark moment then for Blake, who celebrated by throwing his mascot to his mum in the crowd, but also for the entire British team. And having notched up their golden half-century, they simply rode on through. Sophie Christensen winning her 3rd title here with another peerless performance. There were also dressage golds for Natasha Baker and the flag bearer at the opening ceremony, Lee Pearson. Another in the boccia, a sport similar to bowls, for David Smith. Britain passed 50 golds and still counting. Some achievement.
I think it was something only we dreamt rather than at this stage, rather than envisaged. But the dream was big and we wanted to achieve it. So in some ways it feels intensely satisfying. I think the fact is that we've converted nearly half of all our medals that we've won in Rio into gold.
And one athlete has contributed to Britain's medals more than most. Silver in the relay last night, completing an extraordinary games for Kadina Cox. Cox won 4 medals here across 2 sports, athletics and cycling, something no Briton has done since 1988.
I never aimed to make history, I just wanted to do something that was different and enjoy every moment of it and encourage other people to let them know they could do things that were maybe a little bit challenging. But yeah, so I've done that, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve and I'm happy and I just want to sleep now.
But it wasn't just a successful day for Britain. In the long jump for visually impaired athletes, Brazil's Silvânia Costa de Oliveira leaping for glory. Each athlete is guided into their takeoff, and how de Oliveira took off. A gold for the hosts to cheer.
And there has been more success for Britain in the last half hour. Gordon Reid has won the wheelchair tennis singles event. Wheelchair racer Hannah Cockcroft has won her 3rd title here in the 800 metres. And what that all means is that Britain has now won 121 medals at these games. They have beaten the 120 medals they won at London 2012. That was their big target before they came here, and they have done it with more than 2 days to spare, Clive.
Andy, thank you. Andy Swiss there in Rio. Now just look at this. Last night, storms across parts of England dumped more rain in 6 hours than in the last 6 weeks. Flash flooding caused problems on the roads and the railways, where a train derailed because of a landslide near the main lines in and out of North London, near Watford. The derailed train hit another coming in the opposite direction, injuring 2 passengers. Now, the aim of having a UK City of Culture was to bring communities together and help artistic talent to flourish. But has it worked? Well, Londonderry was the first in 2013, and our arts editor Will Gompers has been back to see what legacy has been left behind.
Londonderry, nearly 3 years after it was UK City of Culture. Back then, the Snaking Peace Bridge, connecting 2 sides of a divided city, was a new landmark symbolising a fresh start. It has been a great success, but what else, if anything, remains in terms of a legacy from Derry's 12-month arts extravaganza?
Derry City of Culture 2013. Was it worth it?
I think it was worth it. I really do. We had a great year, and I know that some people say, well, is that all it was? If that's all it was, I still think it was great. Now, there were promises made. The promises didn't come through in terms of, authorities funding government or whatever. But this being Derry, I think we're used to that.
The city's troubled past is well documented, but that was then, and this is now.
There's a new story out there, there's much greater interest in the city, and more people want to come and experience that whole cultural European regeneration that we have to show. Particularly around tourism, you can see the really significant growth. 2013, big numbers came to the city. We expected a dip in 2014. This month past, in August, we had the greatest occupancy we ever had in the city.
So that's the official line. The City of Culture has left a positive legacy. What, though, do local people think?
Derry has come up on the map after City of Culture, definitely, and I just think it's a great wee town.
Yeah, I thought it was great at the time, but there's not a lot of legacy from it, I don't think. There's no jobs.
It's brought more business to it, because naturally enough you get people coming, maybe they're wee businessmen themselves, and they're saying, oh, here, there's a nice place, this looks well, we might invest here.
Investment has been made, albeit relatively modest, in this fashion and textile design centre. It's an attempt to fill at least part of the significant economic hole left by the demise of Derry's shirt-making industry. This gallery has seen some investment too. Its director has some advice for Hull, the next UK City of Culture.
I think to really think strongly about this issue of legacy, what happens afterwards, what happens to the organisations, what happens to the spaces afterwards that have been realised, what happens to the spaces in terms of huge amounts of public funds being pumped into them and programmes, but they really need to consider in terms of what that really does for a city.
Some feel the possibilities created by Derry's year as City of Culture have not been fully realised. Others, that it's kick-started a mini-renaissance. Almost all agree that it was time and money well spent. Will Gompers, BBC News, Derry.
And next Thursday we'll be reporting on the launch of Hull's year as UK City of Culture. And that's it. Don't forget, there's a first look at the papers over on the BBC News channel with Martine Croxall. But now on BBC One, it's time for all the news where you are. From me and the team, have a very good night.